Good evening to all of you. Ben said the next 2 Sundays is actually like the next 6 Sunday nights, Ben. Yeah, we've still got a ways to go. But those of you that aren't always with us on Wednesday nights, we've been covering for the last 2 or 3 months the last week of the life of Jesus, and so we've walked right up to the edge of the crucifixion, and that's actually what we'll be talking about tonight, and then also next Sunday night as well. And Ben and I were talking about it this morning. He said that he had picked out songs that sort of related to the crucifixion, and then we got to talking about the whip, the scourge, and then he also said, "You want me to bring in the crown of thorns that he's got?" And I say, "Yeah, you're welcome to." I don't know how much we'll talk about it this evening, but they were prevalent in the time that we're covering, and so I would highly encourage you before you leave this evening to come up here. I remember it's been a couple years ago now, but Ben brought that whip. I think he was speaking at on the communion. And I don't. He laid it. He didn't hit it. He just laid it down, and it sounded like you dropped something off of a 2-story building. It sounded so loud, just hitting, laying right there. So imagine that being hit against you would certainly be difficult. I mentioned it this morning. I know it's Sunday night, and usually on Sunday night you gotta sit there and be quiet. But tonight you can talk, you can ask questions, and you can comment. I want you to just act like the calendar says it's Wednesday, and not be a Wednesday night talker and not a Sunday night listener. I guess it'd be the best way to talk about it. We talked a couple of months ago in a sermon a little bit about the crucifixion. So I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about maybe the nuts and bolts of crucifixion, no pun intended there, but I do want to at least hit on a few of those things. But we're going to get into more about what Jesus went through, sort of the exterior things this evening. But just a couple of things here to start with. As you can imagine, crucifixion was an extremely cruel form of punishment. We have in the 8th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that there shall be no cruel or unusual punishments. And this is a cruel and unusual punishment. The concept, the idea of crucifixion for us seems quite foreign. I know of no examples of people being crucified in the United States, at least not in a legal sense. Maybe some lynchings that turned into that. But this was a very cruel type of punishment. It was inflicted by the Roman government. Remember, we talked about last week, I'm going to say last week. I don't remember when the last time was we had the class, but we talked about how the Jewish religion did not have the power to crucify or to put to death people that had violated laws. A religious law, and the Roman government had taken that away. Only the Roman government could do that. But they would put this punishment upon slaves, upon foreigners, and upon the worst criminals. That part foreigner there actually ends up being a godsend for, was it Paul, right, who was a Roman citizen, and it kind of kept him out of some trouble that Jesus would not be kept out of. Roman citizens could not be executed in this manner. And so when we think about this form of punishment, Roman citizens could be punished, but this was not a form of punishment for Roman citizens. Victims would be forced to carry their own cross. We talked about this a couple months ago when we talked about how that the standing alone beam right here was pretty standard. Those were in a place of execution. Think about it if you think about the word gallows that were often built for hangings. Those were permanent pieces, and then the crossbeam, as you can see in this picture, was something that you would be forced to carry. Executions always took place outside of the walls of the city. There's probably a few reasons for that. The concept of public execution existed really into the 1800s. In the United States, I think, in the state of Kentucky, I think the last public execution, you may be able to, it was Owensboro, I think, wasn't it, like 1905 or something? But they were almost spectacles. But over time, people started to think maybe this is not something that we need to see. And there was always a fear that there could be a rousing of people supporting the person who was being killed. And so in England, I know they took them inside of the castle, the punishments that would take place. But these were public executions. The cross would have been obviously very heavy. Something that has to hold a man would have to be very strong. Think about, we're probably heavier now than people in Jesus's time would have been, but we can assume that Jesus would have been at least 125 or 130 pounds. How strong does a cross beam have to be to support that? That would be, so it'd be a heavy piece. Go ahead. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. Because once the person was dead, that beam did nothing for them. The person was buried or whatever, and like Ben said, you could use that piece once again. He was unable to carry it due to his condition. We'll talk a little bit about that this evening. And a stranger, Simon of Cyrene, was compelled to assist Jesus. We'll talk about that word compelled a bit more here in just a second. When they reached the place of crucifixion, the victim would have been stripped of his clothing, although in the case of Jewish people, a loincloth was allowed. That's just what I read. I don't know if other people had similar opportunities or similar ways to be able to keep something like that, but this is just what we read. Sometimes the victim would be tied to the cross. So think about that cross. Think about being tied there. Even if you were tied, still no way to go. And then you're starving. A couple hours, we're ready to eat again, right? We eat the biggest meal we ever had for lunch, and about 3 o'clock, it's time for a snack. Well, if you're hanging there, out in the elements, exposed, you're eventually going to need nutrition to sort of keep whatever strength you might have. And so starvation was a way of death. In other cases, you can see the condemned person was thrown backward on the ground with his shoulders against the crossbeam. This is an artistic depiction. There are no real pictures, if we would say that, of Jesus, but we've tried to pictures that are maybe at least try to present what it would have been. And you can see here somebody with Jesus, the arms, maybe don't do it right now. Don't do it right now because you might hit the person beside you in the face. But if you stretch those arms out right there, you'll feel that right across the backside of those shoulders. And that's where we see this happening with Jesus. Heavy square iron nails were driven through the wrists of Jesus into the wood. Crossbeam would then be lifted into place, at which point feet were also attached. And so this was a horrific form of punishment, but it was one designed as a deterrent for people to stop doing whatever it was that they were done. What was Jesus being executed for? Ultimately, what was if we were to say, why was this happening? What was the written on the death certificate reason? For claiming to be king, right? For claiming to be king. And that was the point that the Roman government could not bear, was somebody claiming to be the king. It was not the argument of, the Jewish people said that he was blasphemous because he was saying that he was the Son of God. That held no water, that held no weight with the Roman government. But the threat of potentially overthrowing the Roman government, that was another issue, and that was his cause of execution.
And two, where it is such a serious thing, the only help for serious was the ones that we call thieves on the cross. There's a lot of historians say that they were temple robbers. They robbed the Roman gods' temples, which the Pharisees would tell them that there's no crime, go ahead and do it. And that's why they was being executed in such a horrible manner. It wasn't that they were evil people, but they were robbing the Roman gods.
Sure. So when we were last together, and what Kevin read there just a few moments ago as well, the last time we were together, we talked a bit about Judas. And you may recall that Judas plays what role in Jesus' execution? Okay, he was betrayer, but what was the role? Explain, maybe go a little bit deeper. There you go. He was who sort of exposed Jesus to the Roman authorities. And you'll remember, what was his method of exposure? With a kiss, right? Which was a fairly common greeting at the time. But Jesus saw right through that whenever it happened. He said, why do you do this? Well, when it's over, and I apologize for this being a little smaller, but there was remorse that it seems to see there with Jesus. We talked a bit about this. I think Ben made a few points about this a couple of weeks ago. But when Judas realizes that Jesus was condemned to die, he feels remorse because he had broken one of God's laws. Exodus 23 and verse 7 says, "Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked." And if there was anything that we could use to describe Jesus, is innocent a fair term? When we talked about this, there was really nothing that Jesus could be accused of that held any water. So he was innocent. Could we describe Jesus as righteous? Absolutely. The Bible says there's no man is righteous, no, not one, right? We strive to be righteous. We talked this morning, Don talked this morning in class about, an effort to be Christ-like. We try to be as much, but we will never succeed in being just as Christ was. But Jesus had no reason to be killed. Judas here, returns those 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, casting them down in the temple, and then he departs, and the Bible tells us that he hangs himself. Now, when he throws this down, we'll get to that in a second. Jesus had said that Judas was a devil. There's a few different descriptions that are used right there, but he says Judas was a devil in John chapter 6. John refers to him as a thief. Luke and John both stated that Satan had entered into the heart of Judas. You can interpret this however you like. I don't know that it necessarily matters, but I think these are all various ways of saying that Judas was making some pretty poor decisions. Why do sometimes people make poor decisions when money's involved? Greed?
Lack of vision to see the long picture.
Mm-hmm. Had a friend of mine that we used to work together, and he works at a different school now, but he mentioned something about he said there was a woman that had worked at a certain school, and she had stolen like $8,000 or something like that. And that's not really a massive amount of money when you think about the punishment that could come along with it. And we were talking about it one day as we was going somewhere, and he said, I don't know why people do this, but sometimes it's what Ben said right there. It's every one of us, if we had the ability, if your bank account had $8,000 more in it tonight, you could figure out a way to pay something off, right? But we don't think about the long term of what getting that. Well, Judas viewed this as a way of being able to make a little extra money. The Bible later says that Judas was sort of known to, dip his hand into the pot just a little bit. And so maybe that's greed that was revealing itself right there. But sometimes when we do something like that, it's not until afterwards that we have the remorse for it, right? We realize oh, that was probably not a good idea. But I would imagine everybody that's in jail, you could probably go ask them, do they wish they hadn't done it? And they probably in their most serious times would say, I was not thinking right, or whatever it would be. Yeah, Josh. Right. Sure. So Judas's repentance here is interesting. I put this here, but it seems like it's more of a regretting of his action, not necessarily a change of heart, because we don't really see Judas go talk to Jesus, right? What if Judas had went and I guess apologize would be the right word to Jesus? Should he have done that? I don't know that it was an option. I do think that's fair. That's why I'm reluctant to say too much about it. But yeah. Right. Sure. Right. about when you're little, you teach the kids the 12 apostles, and Judas is the last one who's on the list. But Judas wasn't the only apostle to make mistakes, right? I mean, we're just a couple chapters removed from Peter, right? And what did Peter do with regards to Jesus? He denies him 3 times. But then it's not, you don't have to turn too many pages over to the right till you see Peter doing what in the book of Acts? Preaching. And so was there a way that even though Judas had done what he had done, could this have been fixed?
I think my mind goes to that scripture verse, with man it is impossible, with God all things are possible. This is Judas trying to make things right himself.
Right.
Instead of relying on God or letting God make things right. He's trying, I made this mess, let me fix this mess. And we're always wrong when we do that. We got to take it to God and let God fix it, turn it over and trust Him.
And so it's a good example there of 2 people and how much growth, how much improvement, how much did the church expand because of Peter? Even though he committed a grievous sin, right? Well, when we're in a similar boat, we may do things wrong, but we can't just shut down, right? We can overcome this. We can ask for forgiveness. We can try to make improvements, and then the church can continue to grow as well. We may not deny him the way that Peter did. We might not sell him out for 30 pieces of silver the way that Judas did, but we all make our own sort of mistakes with regards to Jesus there as well. Let's go in. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Don. Yes. I think too, and to go back again to what Don had talked a little bit about this morning, you talked about sometimes the difficulty of us asking forgiveness of people that maybe we in the church that we maybe do wrong for, or we sin against, or whatever the term you want to use right there. But I think we sometimes struggle with that because as humans, we forgive but don't forget, right? I remember, I forgive you, but I remember, and that sometimes is hard for us to, we try to put those same sort of characteristics on God, but like Ben said, that's not really the way God views things. It's hard for me to think that somebody can be baptized and the slate is washed completely clean. That doesn't make sense because that's not how it is in life with me and you, right? You treat me bad for 40 years, then you do one good thing, and I'm just immediately that's hard to do, right? But that's how God is, and his ways are quite a bit different than ours.
Strengthen the brethren.
Yeah.
We're all going to mess up, and we can't let that be the time. We got to take that and go restore the brethren. Hey,
right.
I know what you've been through. I've done it. I'm
right.
Tell you about what I did.
Right.
And how God forgave me.
Absolutely.
That's what we're supposed to do.
Let's go to Matthew chapter 27 here. I think there's a couple of different things that we're going to look at. Let's start first. This is Matthew 27, verses 3 through 5. Melvin, do you care to start for us here, dear? Let's go a little further. Mom, do you care to read verses 6 through 10? So let's talk a little bit here about this. When Judas sees that Jesus is condemned, what does he do with the money? Gives it back. But notice, he gives it back when he sees what? That Jesus was, it's like he was okay with it until he realized maybe I'm in a little too deep. This is what you said there just a second ago, Josh. Maybe he's going to get roughed up a little bit. Maybe we're all going to get kicked out of town. We're going to have to go preach over here instead of over here. But it gets a little bit beyond that. After returning the money, what does Judas do next? And there was a sense of remorse that we talked about, right? You can see that he felt that he had done wrong. But the chief priests do what with the money? Bought a field to bury strangers, to bury poor folks, people that couldn't afford. We see right here, it's a fulfillment of Zechariah, chapter 11 and verse 12 and 13, what Kevin read a second ago. In that story, it's a symbolic prophecy there of these. He said, "You paid me with 30, take it to the potter," or whatever it might would be.
It always goes their way. They're okay with taking money from the treasury to pay for the blood, right. But then they're not going to take it back and put it in because it's got blood.
Right. Good point. Other thoughts on this before we go any further?
I think sometimes people do something grievous for a good cause.
Sure. Right. Right. Absolutely. All right. So let's talk a little bit now, tonight's lesson and next Sunday, about the crucifixion as well. We'll talk about the way to the cross. And after the soldiers mock Jesus, they remove the royal robe, they put his own clothes on him, and they lead him away to crucify him, forcing him to carry his own cross. This, of course, is the depiction, and you can see the cross beam here, and of course, this person here representing Jesus, who's weighted down by it. Think about what Jesus had went through the night before in the first trial, the trial, the illegal trial. He went through then the sort of sham trial the next day, the Roman trial. We were gone on vacation for a week. I'm still tired. I ain't done nothing in a week, and I'm still tired right now. Imagine going through all of this and then having to carry a crossbeam that's got to hold up 150 pounds or whatever. How weighted down that would have been. We get tired. I'm tired thinking about it, much less having to actually do it. Not only being up all night, being whipped and beaten and all of this along the way. Josh? That's probably a pretty fair description. Those of you that are familiar with railroad ties, it's about, I can't say that, but yeah. So this a little bit, it's a lengthier reading. If you want to go into your Bible, it might be able to see it a little bit better. But Luke chapter 23, this is verses 26 through 33. Maria, do you care to read this for us, please? All right. So let's talk a little bit about this trip uphill, as Dad says right there, this way to the cross. First of all, we read there, who was forced, you interpret this however you want, to carry the cross for Jesus? Simon of Cyrene. Now, let's dial back just a little bit. What is this week in Jerusalem where this is all taking place? Passover. And at Passover, people came from all over. That was that's part of the reason why the government has to watch. There's people from other places coming in. It's Cyrene. And so to talk a little bit about where that is, this is Cyrenaica or Cyrene, and this is where Jesus was in Judea. So it's across the Mediterranean Sea. Modern day country of Libya. And so the modern day country of Libya, this is a pretty good ways from here over to there. And so this gives you just an idea of how far people would have come for Passover. There were Jewish people all around the Mediterranean, especially there on the, especially somebody who would have been right there on the coast, which would have allowed transportation back and forth. But this is the man who was compelled to carry it for Jesus. I don't really know anything about him. I don't know why he was the one who was asked to. It might have just been that he was standing right there and he was the person who's, he might have been taller or stronger or whatever and said, you carry this. And what are you going to say? No, when they're about to execute somebody, if you say no, it might be you that's going up there as well. But this is not just Jesus, but who else is being led away to be crucified? The robbers, the whatever we talked about, the rebels, the revolutionaries, whatever term you want to use for them. But this is a standard operating procedure. This was a execution that happens on a semi-regular basis. And these men were being taken to be executed as well. And so Jesus is on the chain gang, as it were, here with all the other troublemakers, the rebel rousers, people that are being put to death. Sure. Absolutely. Where do they go to be to execute to carry out this execution? Luke 23 and verse 33. Where was it? What is it? Go into your Bible. What does it say in Luke 23 and verse 33? And so Maria read there that it was a place called Calvary. So let's talk real quick about this term. Well, we're going to hit on all that here in just a second. So both Calvary and Golgotha are terms that are used to describe the place of crucifixion. Calvary is the English version of the Latin word Calvaria, and Golgotha is a Hebrew word. That's the complicated thing here with a lot of these places, that names were given sort of after the fact. There's no way it was called Calvary at the time. That wasn't a word that would have existed at the time, but they've been translated to them. But each word means kind of what Ben said. There's some skull in some form, maybe place of the skull, but it's derived from one of two things, and there's no real clear consensus on it. It's either the belief that the place, the hill sort of looked like a skull, which that could be the case, or it could be the fact that everybody's put to death there, so that's where your skull ends up, as it were. Either way, this was the common place of execution. There was not some sort of made up on the spot execution. Jesus was being executed in a place where probably hundreds, if not thousands of others had been executed in previous months or years or whatever it would be. Let's go a little further. Luke 23 verses 33 and 34. Jill, do you care to read these? So Jesus says this as he is about to be executed. Think about that for just a second. He asks God to do what, or maybe not, to do what to those responsible for his death. How many of us could have said that? It's really hard to forgive in this is happening in real time, right? Maybe if I go home and think about it for a little while, if I get my blood pressure down, if I cool off just a little bit, I might be more willing to forgive you then. But right then and there would have been difficult to have said, right? Would have been difficult to have asked for forgiveness. But that's where Jesus is quite different than us. Josh.
Of course, like you said just there, that's where Jesus is different from us. But he also knew that it was his plan to die for us. Do you think that made it a little?
Well, maybe so. I think that's probably, that could be a fair, a fair thought. But still, even if we know what the plan is, it still makes it, it's still, you're still, you can think about it, if you're having a surgery or something like that, or the doctor, you broke your arm and they're trying to reset it. Well, you know they're trying to make it better, but it still hurts while they're doing it right there.
And he sees their punishment coming up. Just a few verses before that, when he told the daughters of Jerusalem,
Yeah.
don't wait for me, but wait for yourself.
Sure.
He's giving them a foretaste of what's coming their way.
Right.
And he sees the punishment coming, and even though they deserve that done this time, he's asking God, hold off on this. Don't let this be if there's a way around.
And Jesus, and I think right there, Jesus' punishment is a one-time thing. Their punishment is going to be, it's going to be an extended issue. Let's go further here. John chapter 19, we'll look at verses 18 through 20. Mary, do you care to read this one? All right. Let's go a little bit further. This is 21 through 24. Boo, do you care to read this one? All right. So they place a sign above Jesus on the cross. I don't know if this, I tried to read a little bit about it. I don't know if this was a common thing. It seems reasonable that it would be, that if Ben is being executed, it says Ben Price there, that so people are familiar with who this is, but I don't know. I can't say that with any kind of clarity or any kind of proof. But what sign is placed? What did the sign that Pilate put up there above him? What did it say? Jesus of Nazareth. Nazareth. So that's where he's from. That's the hometown. And then the King of the Jews. Well, we see that written in 3 different languages. What does the Bible say there? I think Mary read it. What were the 3 languages that they wrote it in? All right, so they wrote it in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Any thoughts on a couple of things? 1, why is the sign there? And 2, why is it written in multiple languages? And why these languages? Sure. So those 3, the Hebrew was the language that would have been what the law said, what the Old Testament was written in. Greek was the language, the lingua franca that would have carried around, that people would have talked in different places. And then Latin was the Roman government's sort of official documentation. So then why put this sign up there? Okay. Okay. Ben?
I think 2 reasons. 1 is just to kind of get back at the Jews who made him do this thing he did not want to do.
Right.
So to kind of rub their face in.
Uh-huh.
And 2, I think partly giving God credit.
Yeah.
I mean, just is the King of the Jews. Jesus said he is the King. I think Pilate believed.
The chief priest almost immediately object to the sign. They have a complaint, as it were. What was their complaint? First of all, what was their complaint? What did they say? What did they complain? Right. So this is a technicality. It says the King of the Jews. It should say he said he was the King of the Jews. But I think this is what Ben was getting at a second ago. How does Pilate handle that? I wrote what I wrote. Right. This is, if only he'd been a little stronger with that. A couple hours earlier, perhaps it would have been different. Sure. Right.
You almost have to think of his treatment of that's a throwback to what he said. Yeah, he claimed that.
Right.
And now, okay, we're going to identify him.
Certainly.
Just to be good,
Certainly so. What was done with the clothes that Jesus wore? Well, what was the initial effort was to do what?
Divide the ones that could be divided. The whole piece that's worth
Right. And so they gambled over, like Dad said there, they took the clothes here that Jesus had. And so I think Dad spoke a little bit about that at communion or at well, around the table this morning, but you were talking about that, about how that we don't really get to, you don't take anything with you. And even Jesus, the perfect person who had done nothing wrong, even his clothes got torn apart and gambled over and tossed. And who knows where who knows where those things ended up. Ben, you first. Yeah.
It's ultimate respect.
Yeah.
Let's take, we done took his life. Let's take everything.
Right.
Let's not leave his family.
The whole thing is just a law, mockery of the law, and of judgment, and of everything that's fit and proper. It's a mockery, the whole thing. And that's what, to me, that's what makes it even harder for Jesus. If it had just been a little bit guilty, if it's just been a little bit hateful or mean, he wasn't any of those things.
Right.
And they just mocked him and mocked him and mocked him.
Said it was a what? All right. So, ditto. But we see that Jesus was mocked by passersby, the chief priests, scribes, elders, soldiers, everyone had mocked him. And one of the condemned also mocks Jesus. He says, if you're the Christ, he'll say to save yourself and us. Now, Jesus could have done that. We sing the song, he could have called 10,000 angels, right? Are there any scriptures earlier where a similar comment is made to Jesus? When he was tempted, yeah. When Jesus was tempted by Satan, they take him, he's in the, they say, turn the stones to bread. And how did Jesus respond? Yeah, he said, go up, took him to the highest point and said, jump off and jump off. And, anybody that jumps from here will die, but you'll do what? He said, but Jesus responded, how? And then Jesus said, then Satan said, you go to the highest point. And he said, so look in all directions. And if you'll bow down to me, you can have all of this. And Jesus said, what? It is written. He said that he responded the same way with all of those. And it's a similar thing right here when the guy says, save yourself and save us as well. But the second man condemns him, kind of rebukes him. He said, do you not fear God? He said, we've been punished justly. We've been punished rightfully, but Jesus had done nothing wrong. We're going to read that just real quick here to finish up. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Sure. Right. This last thing, Lucille, do you care to read this bit? Luke 23, verses 39 to 43. So when the first man sort of mocks Jesus, the others have done so as well, and he says, you save yourself and save us. I get it. If there's a person there that could do it, if he could save us from this, because this guy's about 5 minutes away from being put to death. But the second man asked Jesus to do what? The second man had a broader realization, right? The second man realized what about himself? He was wrong. What about Jesus? Jesus was innocent. When we're baptized, when we become a Christian, one of the things that we have to recognize is that we are in the wrong, right? We are this man, we are this second man, right? This is us. We've done wrong. We've committed sin. We've broken laws. We've treated people poor, all of these kind of things. But we realize that Jesus is not that. All right. And so we deserve the punishments that come toward us. But Jesus did not. How did Jesus respond to this man? He said, "You'll be with me in paradise," right there.
The people that would point to that and say he wasn't baptized, which we don't know if he was or not. But you've got to remember what Jesus said. He says, that you may know that while the Son of Man on earth, he has the power to forgive sin. I say, pick up your cross and go your way and walk, or whatever there was. He says, while I'm on earth, I have the power to forgive sin.
Right.
Jesus forgave those people. He forgave the woman caught in adultery, and he forgave those people. That's because he was still here on this earth.
Yeah, I agree. And the point of this, though, is that we're all the thief on the cross. We need to be more like the second one than the first one when we realize our wrong and our approach toward God, what it needs to be. Go ahead, Josh. Right. You're right. That's exactly right, Josh. The first man was he was hoping to have something to do that night, right? It'd been nice to have come off that cross and been able to live another year or 2 or 10 or whatever. But the second man thought about it differently. Let's finish here. John chapter 19, verses 25 through 27. When Jesus is on the cross, we see here, now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. And this is what we see, sort of Jesus's last interactions with people there. And his last thought was concern for his mother, because he was going to be, his time on earth would be finished. We'll stop there. Go ahead. Yeah. Right. Right. Next week, we will, we're going to talk about what was happening while this was happening, and we'll call it strange events or strange occurrences, and we'll discuss sort of what was happening away from the cross while Jesus was put on the cross. After that, then we'll look into resurrection, and those are our last 3 lessons we'll deal with, our resurrection. I don't know how long they'll take, but we'll try to complete them at least before the summer's over, I guess. So any other thoughts or comments or questions before we wrap up? Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Which makes a whole lot of sense that, if somebody's going to, and it's also important to note too, that crucifixion was not it wasn't done in 5 minutes. It was an extended thing. We talked about that with Jesus a couple months ago when we had that lesson. But if somebody walked by, you could see who it is and what they've done and what have you. Any other comments? Thank you. Y'all turned into the Sunday night crowd there real quick.